James Beard Award winner Gabriel Rucker is in an industry wrought with ups and downs, and the COVID-19 pandemic proved he's strong enough to survive its impacts on his business too. He tells me he watched as some of the fellow chefs he respects in Portland made the tough decision to close.
Some of the bigger groups that have lots of restaurants, you know, the Gorms with the Tasting Alders and the Toro, Andy and all the Pock, those closing down was kind of shocking because those are the places that you just feel like, oh, they're busy all the time, they're bulletproof.
Although he never thought about closing Pigeon and Canard as an option and knew he'd just have to find ways to hustle when he couldn't welcome diners inside under the COVID restrictions.
When you ask what's the most shocking, is that a lot of the smaller places, like chef-driven, chef-owned, are really fighting through, and even these restaurants, I have Pigeon and then right next to it, Canard. I've been able to keep some staff on, and the word pivot I never want to hear again once this is all over. But we have, I have just hustled, right? It's in the fiber of, you want a cooking class? Sure. Luckily corporations businesses, office buildings are in trouble too, and they're like, how can we can't have holiday parties, so let's hire a chef to teach everybody on a Zoom class, and whatever it is, that we can do, we're hustling to do it.
Since moving to Portland in 2002, he's witnessed an evolution in the city's identity as a food destination.
When I came here, it wasn't a global destination of a restaurant and a food scene. The food scene has exploded, and the thing that I like about the food scene in Portland is that we all kind of root for each other. It's that's the Portland spirit, right? That
spirit and support for Gabriel also means embracing imperfections.
I think that's what also drew people to our city. I didn't know that's what they drew them to Pigeon. The food we were making was spectacular. The people cared deeply about what they were doing, but it's not a perfect experience. Right. And in its imperfection, we actually have achieved it to be somewhat closer to perfect, right? Because the imperfect is what makes us special. Yeah. And that's what Portland was. Portland was the kind of the Jewel of the country's dining. It was the imperfect is what made it so fantastic, and that's what drew people from all over the country to come and eat here.
He's counting on what he sees as the gems of Portland to lure people back here post-pandemic once again to see what this city has to offer.
Just in general, I think that one of the things that makes Portland special, you can fly into Portland, you can have an amazing meal, have special donuts, special, coffee that people, pay to ship to across the country. You can see a band that you're going to hear about later on the radio in some small venue that's, you feel like you discovered it. And then you can wake up the next day and drive an hour in any direction and be in the most beautiful things that you've ever seen. You can be at the ocean, you can be in the snow.
Gabriel's love for where he lives is coupled with an optimism as he looks ahead.
Hopefully real estate, it becomes a little bit more affordable to get a lease, and that people that own buildings and commercial properties need to fill them, and that it becomes what Portland was, or kind of a little bit closer to what Portland was back when we started, which is young people without millions of dollars can still start a business, and the artistic community can thrive. And so I think that hopefully, in a perfect world, we know that we have to deal with COVID and the effects of that, and that out of the ashes, can rise a whole nother generation of young chefs that are kind of blazing a new path in Portland, but that still keep room for some of the old guys to survive.